All right, welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to try to get a handle on how psychoanalysis changed after Freud.
Yeah.
And we've got, well, kind of a unique source for this one, a chapter from a Portuguese history of psychoanalysis textbook.
Wow.
And it's got this dense bibliography, too, full of names like Oscar Pfister, Wilhelm Reich, even Ernest Chris.
Wow, some real heavy hitters.
Yeah, like a who's who of psychoanalytic history. So I'm excited to dig into this and
Me too.
see what we can learn.
It's so interesting to think about how psychoanalysis, I mean, a field that we often think of as being about like the individual, you know,
Right.
was really shaped by the world around it.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the 1920s and 30s, right?
Yeah.
This period between the world wars.
Huge changes going on.
Huge societal shifts.
Yeah, absolutely.
The rise of mass culture, people trying to figure out what individual freedom meant in a world that was becoming so much more interconnected.
So you've got people, on the one hand, trying to be unique, find their own identities.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, the world's kind of pushing them toward conformity.
Exactly. It's a real paradox.
That's such a fascinating paradox.
And psychoanalysis itself.
Yeah.
It got caught up in that very tension, right?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
It was gaining popularity, spreading really rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it was facing all these conflicts.
Internal conflicts.
Yeah, within itself.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that tension, that's key to understanding this rise of Freudism.
Freudism, okay.
It wasn't like a unified school of thought, you know?
Yeah.
It was more of this like global movement applying psychoanalytic ideas to just about everything.
Everything, wow.
Religion, art, politics,
Oh.
you name it.
So let's unpack this Freudism a little bit.
Sure.
I'm looking at this bibliography, and the names are incredible.
Oh, yeah.
We've got Oscar Pfister.
Okay.
He was a pastor, right?
That's right.
And he was using psychoanalysis.
To understand religious faith and how it related to education. Was that common back then?
You know, Pfister's actually a really good example of how psychoanalysis was crossing boundaries that we might not expect today.
That's interesting.
I mean, he saw this profound connection between religious experience
Yeah.
and the unconscious.
Okay.
He used psychoanalytic ideas to help people really grapple with their faith in this rapidly modernizing world.
Wow. So he was like blending therapy and spirituality?
In a way, yes.
That was pretty radical for the time.
It was definitely groundbreaking.
And then you've got Wilhelm Reich.
Ah, yes, right.
Who, if I'm remembering this right, connected psychoanalysis with Marxism.
Yeah.
And even like explored how the body influences the mind.
He did. Reich was a truly controversial figure.
Yeah.
I mean, he believed that psychological repression wasn't just this individual thing, but that it was tied to, you know, societal structures.
Oh, interesting.
Especially capitalism.
His work on what he called body armor.
Body armor.
The idea that we hold all this emotional tension in our muscles.
Yeah.
Well, that paved the way for all these body-oriented therapies that are still popular today.
So he was saying, essentially, that our personal struggles are also like reflections of
Exactly.
larger social and political forces.
Precisely.
That's a pretty powerful idea.
It is.
And then there's Ernest Chris
Right.
bringing psychoanalysis into, of all things, the art world.
He did.
That's so interesting to me.
Chris argued that art wasn't just about aesthetics.
Okay.
It was a window right into the artist's unconscious.
Oh, wow.
His analyses of artists like
Yeah.
Rembrandt and Michelangelo,
Oh, wow.
they really helped us see
Yeah.
how creativity can be an expression of, but also a defense against, you know, these unconscious desires and anxieties.
That completely changes how I think about art.
Yeah.
Like there's this whole other layer of meaning
Absolutely.
waiting to be uncovered.
Yeah.
But, okay, so psychoanalysis is expanding in all these fascinating directions.
It was.
At the same time, it's trying to establish itself as like a legitimate field. Did that create any conflicts?
Oh, absolutely.
Really?
This tension between expanding intellectually
Yeah.
and like, you know, setting up these professional boundaries, that's a major theme in the history of psychoanalysis.
I can't imagine.
Think of it like this.
Okay.
You have this plant that's growing super fast, sending out shoots in every direction at some point.
Yeah.
It needs some structure,
Okay.
you know, to support all that growth.
So some kind of framework to contain all that energy.
Exactly.
But wouldn't that risk stifling some of the intellectual ferment?
That's the question.
that made Freudism so exciting in the first place?
That is the big question.
Yeah.
And it's one that these different schools of thought addressed, in their own ways.
Yeah.
Now, remember, the debates weren't about rejecting Freud.
Right.
They were about how to interpret and expand his ideas.
Gotcha.
And there were three big controversies that really shaped how those schools emerged.
All right, lay 'em on me.
You got the Oedipus complex, female sexuality,
Yeah.
and the rise of child psychoanalysis.
Okay, those are some pretty big topics.
They are.
So let's start with the Oedipus complex.
Sure.
Freud saw it as this universal experience shaping how we develop, but was it really universal?
Yeah, that's the question.
Across cultures.
That's where the anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski comes in.
Malinowski, okay.
His research on the Trobriand Islanders really challenged Freud's assumptions.
Oh, really?
He found that the specific object of the incest taboo, that wasn't universal.
Interesting.
Even if those underlying psychological dynamics might be.
Yeah. So the Oedipus complex was, in a way, a product of its time and culture.
You could say that.
Did that throw the whole field into chaos?
Well, not exactly.
Okay.
Different schools of thought emerged, each one offering their own take on the controversy.
Okay, so give me some examples.
Well, like the Hungarian school, with figures like Ferenczi,
Okay.
they emphasized cultural relativity.
Cultural relativity, all right.
They believed the Oedipus complex could manifest differently in different cultures,
That makes sense.
depending on the specific social structures and family dynamics at play.
So they're saying you can't just apply a one-size-fits-all model of the Oedipus complex.
Right.
It needs to be understood in context.
Exactly.
What about the others?
Well, you also had the German school
Okay.
with figures like Karl Abraham. They grounded their arguments in clinical observation.
Okay.
They said, even if the specific object of the taboo varies,
Yeah.
the underlying psychological dynamics,
Like what?
well, like the child's desire for the parent, the rivalry with the same-sex parent,
Gotcha.
they said, we see these patterns
Yeah.
in our clinical practice,
Yeah.
regardless of cultural differences.
So it's like they're saying, look, we're seeing this consistently,
Yeah.
even if the details are a bit different.
Precisely.
What about the British school?
Oh, they brought a different angle.
Okay.
They had figures like Ernest Jones,
Okay.
who really focused on those early childhood experiences.
With childhood, right?
Even the ones before the Oedipal stage,
Like pre-Oedipal.
Pre-Oedipal.
Okay.
They argued that those early experiences
Yeah.
could shape the child's personality and influence how they navigate those later Oedipal conflicts.
So we've got multiple interpretations of the Oedipus complex.
Yeah.
Each one building on Freud, but also kind of challenging him in fascinating ways.
That's the beauty of it.
What about female sexuality?
Ah, yes.
That was another area where
it was
Freud's theories were particularly controversial.
Oh, incredibly so.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Freud's ideas about, female passivity and penis envy.
Yeah, penis envy?
They were already being criticized in his own time.
Oh, wow.
But in the 1930s, with women's roles changing so rapidly,
Right.
those criticisms became even louder.
Like society was catching up to the need for a more nuanced understanding of female psychology.
Yes.
So who were some of the key figures who were pushing back against these?
There were some incredible thinkers.
Yeah.
Like Helena Deutsch,
Okay.
Karen Horney, Joan Riviere.
Oh, right.
They all played crucial roles in challenging this Freudian orthodoxy.
Interesting.
They argued that reducing female psychology to penis envy
Right.
was just a gross oversimplification. Ignoring all these other factors.
Yeah.
Social, cultural, interpersonal that shape women's lives and experiences.
It's like they're saying, hey, women are more than just envious of penises. We have our own desires and anxieties and ways of being in the world.
That's it. Exactly.
They were pioneers advocating for this more complex understanding of female identity.
Absolutely.
Paving the way for, feminist psychology.
Yeah.
And challenging a psychoanalysis to,
Confront its own bias.
Confront its own biases, yeah.
Yes.
It's inspiring to see how they were making their voices heard.
It is.
And, shaping the direction of the field.
They were trailblazers.
But then, of course, World War II happened.
Right.
And that had a devastating impact on the psychoanalytic community.
On so many levels.
Yeah.
Many analysts were forced to flee Europe.
Yeah.
Including Freud himself.
Of course.
Who died in exile in London in 1939.
Right.
And, psychoanalysis itself was under attack.
I can imagine.
By the Nazis.
Oh,
with Freud's books being burned.
Oh, wow.
It was just a time of tremendous loss and upheaval.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So how did the field adapt?
Well, it's interesting because in a way, the war also led to this diaspora of psychoanalytic thought.
Diaspora.
You had these three major centers that emerged.
Really?
USA, England, and France.
Okay.
And each of them developed their own unique approach.
Interesting.
Shaped by, their cultural context and the personalities of the key figures who were leading the way.
So it's like branching out, taking root in different soils, producing different fruits.
A perfect analogy.
This is getting really fascinating.
It is.
I can't wait to learn more about how each of those centers developed.
Yes, let's explore those in our next segment.
Okay.
We'll see how those challenges and opportunities of the post-war world really shape the future of psychoanalysis.
All right. Can't wait. So before the break, we were talking about how World War II really shook things up in the world of psychoanalysis. Analysts fleeing Europe, Freud himself passing away. And then, this whole psychoanalytic diaspora, as you put it, with these new centers popping up in the US, England, France. It really feels like this turning point, not just for the people involved, but for the ideas themselves,
It was a turning point, absolutely.
Yeah.
You can't underestimate how much the war impacted psychoanalysis.
Yeah.
But even with all the loss and the upheaval, there was also this resilience, this drive to adapt and rebuild. And that led to some fascinating developments as each of these centers grappled with, the challenges and opportunities of the post-war world.
Okay, so let's start with the USA.
Okay.
It became this haven for so many European analysts, but I imagine it must have been such a different cultural landscape.
Oh, it was.
Compared to Vienna or Berlin. True. How did psychoanalysis find its footing in this new environment?
It's a classic immigrant story, really.
Right. Oh, how so?
Well, you have all these brilliant minds come into this new country trying to integrate, but also hold on to their traditions.
That tension.
Exactly, that tension. And in the U.S., there was this really strong push for psychoanalysis to prove itself.
Okay.
To prove its scientific legitimacy, to fit into the more pragmatic, results-oriented culture of American medicine.
So less about abstract theories and more about showing practical applications.
Exactly.
I see.
And that's where ego psychology really took hold.
Ego psychology.
Figures like Heinz Hartmann, Ernst Kriss. We talked about him earlier with his work on art.
Right.
Rudolf Lowenstein.
Okay.
They really shifted the focus away from the id.
That was Freud's big thing, right?
Yeah, all those primal drives.
Right. Okay.
But they shifted the focus to the ego.
Okay, the ego. So the part of us that...
The part of us that deals with reality.
Right, that has to navigate the world.
Yes, exactly.
So it was about understanding how people adapt to their environment, manage their impulses, function effectively in society.
Precisely.
And I can see how that would resonate.
Oh, totally.
In a society that's so focused on individual achievement, success.
Yep, fit right in.
Yeah.
And ego psychology actually did a lot to make psychoanalysis more palatable to a much wider audience.
More mainstream.
Yeah. And it aligned really well with American values of self-reliance,
Oh, yeah.
I see that.
Responsibility.
Personal responsibility.
But, of course, there were criticisms.
Oh, of course.
Like what?
Well, some people felt it had become too, watered down.
Just Americanized.
Yeah, that it had lost that radical edge.
Right, that Freud had.
Exactly, that made Freud so revolutionary.
It's like that tension between fitting in and challenging the status quo,
Always that tension.
But even within that drive to assimilate,
yes,
American psychoanalysis was still branching out. You mentioned self-psychology earlier, and its focus on narcissism and empathy.
Yeah, self-psychology emerged partly as a reaction to what some saw as the limitations of ego psychology.
Okay.
The main figure there was Heinz Kohut.
All right.
And he argued that narcissism
Yeah.
which, we often see as a negative
Appears to
trait,
be. Right.
was actually like this fundamental human need
Okay.
essential for developing a healthy sense of self.
So instead of trying to just fix narcissism,
Yeah,
Kohut was trying to understand it
exactly.
on a
Yeah.
deeper level.
He was
Like,
he believed that those early childhood experiences
yeah.
of, being mirrored and idealized by our caregivers
Okay.
were crucial
For what?
for developing a cohesive sense of self.
A cohesive sense of self. Okay.
And he said if those needs aren't met,
Yeah.
people can develop these narcissistic vulnerabilities
Oh, I see.
that can lead to problems later in life.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
It does.
It's like saying everyone needs to feel seen
Yeah,
and valued to thrive.
absolutely.
Did these ideas change how therapy was conducted?
Oh, definitely.
How so?
Well, cell psychology brought this new emphasis
Okay.
on the therapist's role
Uh-huh.
in providing a kind of,
Yeah.
empathic presence,
Okay.
helping the patient feel understood and accepted.
So it's a shift away from that
Yes.
more neutral, detached stance
Right.
of traditional psychoanalysis.
Right.
It's more relational,
It is.
recognizing the therapist as not just an observer,
Right.
but a participant in the healing process.
Exactly.
This makes me think about how much these different cultural contexts
Yes.
really shape these ideas.
They do.
What about England? How did psychoanalysis develop there after the war?
England's a little different.
Okay.
While it also became a home to many European analysts,
Right.
there wasn't that same pressure
Yeah.
to assimilate into one dominant cultural paradigm.
So you see like a more tolerant coexistence of different schools.
Exactly. More like a mosaic,
Mosaic. Okay.
where all these different pieces
Yeah.
fit together to create a larger picture.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, so you had the Kleinian group
Right.
carrying on Melanie Klein's work
Mm-hmm.
on object relations,
Okay.
the importance of early experiences.
Right.
Then you had the Anna-Freudian group,
Yes.
more aligned with Sigmund Freud's original ideas,
Okay.
but also focusing on ego defenses,
Yeah.
child development,
Right.
and then you had the independents,
The independence. Okay.
sometimes called the middle group,
Gotcha.
who were known for their flexibility
Okay.
and creative thinking.
So let's break those down a bit.
Let's-
Remind me, what were those key ideas of the Kleinian group?
Well, the Kleinians, they really delved into the depths of the unconscious.
Okay.
They focused on those, primitive fantasies,
Okay.
the role of aggression and the death drive, and the impact of those very early relationships
Yeah.
between infants and their mothers.
Gotcha.
They believed that these early experiences
Right.
really shape our deepest fears,
Okay.
desires, and how we relate to the world.
So a pretty intense focus
Oh, definitely.
on those formative years.
Absolutely.
And they also had a more active style of therapy, right?
Yes, they did.
How so?
Well, Kleinian therapists, they believed in being more directly involved,
Okay.
offering interpretations,
Mm-hmm.
challenging the patient's defenses.
Okay.
They saw the therapy room as a kind of
A
microcosm
microcosm. Okay.
of those early object relationships
Oh, interesting.
where those unconscious patterns could be played out
All right.
and worked through.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
What about the Anna-Freudians?
Well, Anna Freud, being Sigmund Freud's daughter,
Yeah, of course.
she had, this deep connection to her father's work,
Right.
but she also made her own significant contributions,
Oh, yeah. Actually.
particularly in child psychoanalysis.
Yeah. Okay.
She emphasized the role of the ego
Mm-hmm.
and its defenses,
Okay.
focusing on how children cope with,
Yeah.
anxiety and conflict as they develop.
So more emphasis on the conscious mind.
Yes.
And how it manages those unconscious forces.
Exactly.
I see.
And Anna Freud was also a big advocate
For what?
for integrating psychoanalysis with education.
That's interesting.
Yeah, she believed that understanding,
Hmm.
children's emotional development
Yeah.
could really improve learning
Makes sense.
and create a more supportive environment for growth.
That's a really valuable insight, I think.
It is.
Now, the independents sound like the most intriguing group to me.
They were a fascinating bunch.
What made them stand out?
Well, in a way, they were kind of a rebel group.
Okay.
Less interested in,
Yeah.
rigidly adhering to one particular school of thought
Okay.
and more focused on what actually worked in
Yeah.
therapy.
So less dogma, more about tailoring the approach to
Exactly.
the individual.
Precisely.
I like that.
They believed that every patient is different
Makes sense.
and requires a unique approach.
Yeah.
Thinkers like Winnicott
Okay.
and Masood Khan,
Uh-huh.
They really emphasized the importance
Yeah.
of that therapeutic relationship itself.
The relationship, yeah.
The unique dynamic
Right.
between the therapist and the patient.
Okay.
Winnicott, for example,
Yeah.
he's famous for that concept of the good enough mother.
Oh, right.
The idea that parents don't have to be perfect,
Yeah.
just good enough
Good enough. I love that.
to provide a safe and nurturing environment.
It takes the pressure off, you know?
It does.
Okay, so we've got this incredibly rich and diverse landscape in England.
We do.
What about France?
France.
We know psychoanalysis kind of had a later start there.
It did.
How did it eventually catch on?
Well, France is really interesting
Okay.
because it really embraced psychoanalysis
Mm-hmm.
in its own very unique way.
Yeah.
Some people call it a refoundation of the field.
A refoundation, huh?
And at the heart of this refoundation
Yeah.
was the enigmatic figure of Jacques Lacan.
Ah, Lacan.
You can't talk about French psychoanalysis without talking about Lacan.
He's a name you can't ignore.
No, you can't.
But he's also known for being, like,
Oh, he was
notoriously complex
Yeah.
and challenging.
challenging is an understatement.
So what was it about his ideas
Yeah.
that really captivated the French intellectual scene?
Well, Lacan was a brilliant but controversial thinker.
Okay.
He drew on all these different influences,
Of what?
philosophy, linguistics, structuralism,
Wow.
to reinterpret Freud's ideas
Okay.
for a new generation.
Interesting.
He believed that language
Okay.
played this crucial role in shaping our unconscious.
Okay.
He argued that our desires, our identities, they're
Mhm.
formed through our
Right.
interactions with others
Yeah.
and these symbolic systems
Mhm.
that structure our world.
So it's not just about what's happening inside our heads,
Right.
but how we're making sense of the world
Yes.
through language and social interactions.
Exactly.
That's pretty different
For
from
sure.
those more biologically focused
Yeah.
models of psychoanalysis.
It was a radical departure.
Wow.
I mean, Lacan challenged some of the core assumptions
Really?
of traditional psychoanalysis.
Interesting.
And his ideas were,
Yeah.
both praised for their originality and
Mhm.
criticized for being so obscure.
Right. He's not exactly easy to read,
No, he's not.
but you can't deny his impact,
Oh, absolutely.
especially in France
Yeah.
and Latin America, where his ideas are still being,
Debated and explored.
debated and explored to this
Right.
day.
But this day,
We've covered a lot of ground here.
we have.
It's amazing to see how psychoanalysis spread and diversified after the war, taking root in these different cultural contexts,
Mm-hmm.
leading to this, tapestry of ideas.
It's a rich tapestry.
But as we move further into the 20th century,
Yeah.
did these different schools stay distinct,
That's a good question.
or did they start to converge?
That is a great question. And it actually leads us to
Okay.
one of the most significant developments in the latter part of the 20th century,
What's that?
the rise of what we call relational psychoanalysis.
Relational psychoanalysis. Okay.
And this was a movement
Yeah.
that drew on all these different ideas
Okay.
from various schools,
Mhm.
self-psychology,
Yeah.
object relations theory,
Mhm.
interpersonal psychoanalysis,
Great.
to create this more integrated
Okay.
and nuanced understanding of the therapeutic relationship.
So it was like a bridge between these different perspectives.
Yes.
What were some of those key ideas?
Well, relational psychoanalysis really emphasized the co-created nature of the therapy experience.
The co-created nature. What do you mean by that?
Well, it recognized that both the therapist and the patient, they bring their own subjective experiences to the room,
Right.
their own histories, their own unconscious biases.
So the therapist isn't just this blank slate.
Exactly. It challenged that idea.
Interesting.
It emphasized the importance
Of what?
authenticity and mutual recognition
Mutual recognition.
in the therapeutic dialogue.
So it's not just about the patient projecting,
Right.
their past experiences onto the therapist, but
Yeah.
it's about the therapist also being influenced
Yes.
by their own internal world and
Absolutely.
how they interact with the patient.
Precisely.
That's a really
It is.
profound shift in thinking.
It's a big shift.
So did this lead to changes in how therapy was actually conducted?
Oh, no, definitely.
What ways?
Well, relational psychoanalysts, they tend to be more
yeah.
flexible and adaptable in their approach.
Okay.
Less bound by,
Mm-hmm.
rigid techniques or interpretations.
Uh-huh.
They emphasize dialogue, collaboration,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing the patient as an active participant
Oh, nice.
in their own healing.
It sounds like psychoanalysis was coming full circle.
In a way, it was.
Returning to that emphasis on the human relationship that
Yeah.
was at the heart of,
Of Freud's original vision.
Freud's original vision.
But now it was being understood in a much more complex and
Yeah.
nuanced way.
Right, informed by all these different perspectives
It-
that had developed over the decades.
That's right.
I love that.
And, this process of evolution and integration,
Yeah.
it continues today.
Really?
Oh, absolutely.
That's so cool.
Psychoanalysis is a living tradition.
A living tradition. I like that.
It's constantly being reinterpreted and reapplied
Yeah.
in light of new knowledge and experience.
That's what makes it so exciting.
It is exciting.
But of course, psychoanalysis didn't escape, the
way.
challenges of the late 20th century unscathed.
It did not.
It faced criticism for being too expensive,
Yes.
too time-consuming, and lacking, empirical support.
That was a big one.
How did the field respond to these new pressures?
That's what we'll explore after the break.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. We'll be back in just a moment to see how psychoanalysis navigated the turn of the millennium, all its struggles and triumphs as it entered this new era.
All right, welcome back. We've been on quite the journey with psychoanalysis, haven't we? From Freud's early ideas to ego psychology, self-psychology, those different schools in England and France. But as we hit the 21st century, things got kind of, challenging for psychoanalysis, right?
Yeah, it was a bit of a reckoning, you could say.
I mean, therapy was becoming more about quick fixes.
Right, quick fixes.
And there was this growing demand for evidence-based treatment.
Evidence, yeah, it was everywhere.
So how did psychoanalysis handle all that? Did it, fade away?
Well, the late 20th and early 21st centuries definitely brought a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
The world was changing fast, and some of those traditional ways of doing psychoanalysis just didn't seem to fit anymore.
But even with all those challenges, there was this
Yeah.
amazing resilience
Okay.
and a real drive to innovate. Psychoanalysis didn't disappear, it evolved.
So it wasn't about ditching those core insights,
No, not at all.
but more about finding ways to make them relevant in
Exactly.
a changing world.
That's it.
What did that look like in practice?
Well, one of the big developments was this move towards shorter-term therapies.
Shorter term, okay.
Traditional psychoanalysis could take years,
Oh, yeah.
which just wasn't practical for a lot of people.
Not practical or affordable,
Right, both.
for sure.
So analysts started developing
Yeah.
more focused approaches,
Okay.
time-limited approaches.
So like targeting specific issues.
Exactly, more efficiently.
Makes sense. I mean, people are busy.
They are.
They want to see results. They might not have years for therapy.
That's right.
But could you really get to those deep unconscious things in a shorter time?
That was the debate.
Oh, I bet.
Some people said, well, you're sacrificing depth for efficiency.
Right.
Others said, no, you can still achieve meaningful change,
Yeah.
especially if you're really clear about the goals
Okay.
and you focus on those specific issues.
It's like anything else, I guess. Sometimes you need a complete overhaul.
Yeah,
Sometimes just a little tweak can make a big difference.
exactly.
What about the criticism that psychoanalysis was too focused on the individual?
Right.
Too much about what's wrong with a person, not enough about the world around them.
Hmm.
Did it ever engage with those bigger social and cultural issues?
That was another area where psychoanalysis really evolved.
Okay, in what way?
There was this growing understanding that you couldn't separate the individual from the
Okay.
social and political context they live in.
Right, right.
You had thinkers like Nancy Chodorow, Jessica Benjamin.
Okay.
They were drawing on feminist theory,
Uh-huh.
relational psychoanalysis,
Okay.
and they were exploring how things like gender roles, family structures, cultural norms shape our identities, shape our relationships.
So instead of just looking at the individual's problems,
Yeah.
psychoanalysis started to acknowledge those systems and structures.
Yes, the influence of those larger forces.
Right, and how they can impact mental health.
Absolutely. And that led to a greater awareness
Of what?
of how things like racism, sexism, economic inequality
Yeah.
could affect people's mental well-being.
Right, so therapy is not just about individual healing anymore. It's
Right.
about acknowledging those social and political forces
Exactly.
that contribute to suffering.
That's a great way to put it.
Alongside all these changes in how we think about things,
Yeah,
there was also this renewed focus on research.
there was.
One of the big criticisms, if I remember right,
It was a big one.
was that psychoanalysis wasn't evidence-based.
People wanted proof.
Yeah.
It was all just theory.
Too abstract, too difficult to,
Yeah.
test empirically.
So how did psychoanalysis respond to that? Did it just ditch all the theory and go full-on data?
Not quite. There was definitely this tension between
those who wanted to make psychoanalysis more scientifically rigorous,
right,
and those who felt like its essence couldn't be captured by,
by traditional research.
traditional methods.
But even the people who were skeptical of research, they understood they needed to show that psychoanalysis worked.
That it could produce real benefits.
So it's about making the intangible more tangible.
Yes. Proving that even those deepest mysteries of the mind could be studied in a more systematic way.
That makes sense.
And that led to some really cool developments.
Like what?
Well, researchers started using neuroscience.
Brain science.
Yeah, and attachment theory to study how early experiences affect brain development and emotional regulation.
Wow, so bringing in different fields to get a better understanding.
And they also developed more sophisticated ways to measure how well psychoanalytic therapies actually worked.
Okay, how did they do that?
Well, they looked at things like symptom reduction, improvements in relationships, increases in self-awareness.
So finding ways to measure those subjective changes.
Yes. Bridging that gap between the world of experience and the world of data.
That's fascinating. It seems like psychoanalysis has come a long way.
It really has.
We've seen how it's adapted, evolved, really expanded its reach over the past century.
And it has.
Responding to all these debates and pressures, it's clearly more than just therapy. It's a whole way of understanding ourselves and the world.
I completely agree. It's so woven into Western culture now.
It is.
I can't imagine our world without it.
Me neither.
It's influenced art, literature, film, even how we think about love and relationships.
And politics.
And politics, exactly.
It's like it's given us this whole new language for talking about what it means to be human.
Yes.
A way of seeing beneath the surface,
Yes.
Understanding those hidden desires and motivations that shape our lives.
And as we move further into the 21st century,
Yeah.
I think that psychoanalytic perspective is more important than ever.
Really? Why is that?
Well, in a world that's so complex, so fragmented,
Right.
so driven by technology.
Yeah, we're all glued to our screens.
Exactly. We need ways of understanding that human element,
That human element.
those
right?
deeper needs and desires.
That drive our behavior.
Yes, exactly.
Like a compass, almost.
Compass, I like that.
Helping us navigate these uncharted waters of the 21st century.
I love that image.
Find our way back to what really matters.
What does matter?
Connection, meaning a deeper understanding of ourselves and each other.
You put it beautifully.
This has been such a thought-provoking deep dive.
It has been.
We've covered so much history.
From Freud's early discoveries to contemporary psychoanalysis.
What stands out to me is that sense of,
Yeah,
ongoing evolution.
constantly evolving.
That willingness to adapt, to question, to keep searching for deeper understanding.
And that's what makes it so relevant today.
I agree.
As we face new challenges and think about those age-old questions about what it means to be human.
Psychoanalysis gives us this framework for making sense of it all.
It does.
So, to our listener, if this deep dive has piqued your interest,
Don't stop here.
there's so much more to discover, to question, to debate.
And to integrate into your own life.
Remember, psychoanalysis is a conversation, a journey of exploration that's still unfolding.
It is.
What a fantastic way to end this episode. We've covered a century of history.
We have.
From Freud's early discoveries to the diverse landscape of psychoanalysis today.
A rich landscape.
I think that sense of ongoing evolution, that willingness to adapt, to question, to keep searching,
That's the heart of it.
that's what makes it so powerful.
It does.
So to our listener, thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey.
It's been a pleasure.